Hi, everyone, and welcome to Breaking the News Deep Cuts, our interview series that previews our forthcoming documentary podcast, Breaking the News CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media. I'm John Hashimoto, joined by my co host and series co producer, Bill Smee. Our guest today is someone many of you know well and recognize, Miles O'Brien, former CNN senior correspondent and now one of public media's most trusted science journalists. Hi, Miles.
John and Bill, great to see you both.
And fittingly, Miles is joining us from one of the most consequential places on Earth, the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica, where he's reporting on the front lines of climate science for PBS. Miles, again, thanks for taking the time. Where are you exactly?
I am just a few miles from the Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica. I'm sitting atop a Korean research vessel, an icebreaker called the Araon, and it's an ark full of scientists from all over the world. There are about 40 scientists on board who are trying to understand this particular glacier every which way they can imagine, including drilling a hole at the point where the glacier, the ground, and the sea meet, the so-called grounding line. And what they're trying to find out is, why is this particular glacier melting so much faster than its neighbors? And why we care about that is Thwaites in and of itself has enough ice turned to water to rise sea level all over the world by 2.5 feet. And it's holding back two other ice shelves, which would add another 10 feet to the equation. So when this glacier goes, it's going to be a big deal. The question is, when will that happen? Is the melting accelerating? What's the temperature of the water beneath? What's the topography below? None of these questions have been answered by science because it's very difficult to get here. But we're here, and the team has had pretty good success so far, perhaps getting some data, which up until this point has been kind of holy grail stuff for science. So it's very exciting to be on board for what might be a little bit of scientific history.
Yeah, and unfortunately, melting ice is something of an apt metaphor for our podcast series, which is
Yes.
about the media fracturing, the decline in trust of media, something I know that you, as a member of public media, have experienced firsthand. We'll talk more about that, but let's start with this assignment you're on, which has been amazing. Not only have you been doing PBS reporting, but also hits, as we call it, on CNN and streaming live on Facebook. What does this assignment require in time and resources, and why is it harder than ever to get commitments from about this type of reporting from, say?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a really tough environment. CNN did express some interest at one point in even doing a documentary derived from this endeavor, but they went cold on me. So, I think given the environment, given the way the big legacy corporate media enterprises are going, conversations and pieces and discussions about climate change are not on the front burner, if you'll excuse that expression. And you know, have had to kind of cobble together some interest through public media and other interested people who are interested in climate and what it all means for people and the consequences of what happens here. But it's a scramble to be an entrepreneurial journalist. I've spent about 17 years at CNN. I was truly a company man. And when I left, I didn't understand how to make a business out of being a journalist. And I'm not sure anyone knows how to do that yet, although I'm, groping my way through it, poking around on Substack, shooting a lot of things vertically, even though I'm a real horizontal kind of guy, and trying to make my way in this new world. It's a two-edged sword. It's very exciting to reach people in that immediate kind of way, but as we all know, the business plan, the business model is difficult. It's hard to close it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the business plan. I'm curious, back in the day when science reporting was more robust at CNN, you were, riding herd over that. What you flicked at it a little bit a minute ago, but what do you think has really changed? There was a voracious appetite for what you did back in the 80s and 90s at CNN and into the aughts. What's changed?
Well, we miss Ted Turner, don't we? That's number one. I mean, Ted was listen, he came from a billboard family. He wanted to make money. Let's not kid ourselves about that. But Ted also wanted to save the world. I mean, there's a plenty of evidence, from the Goodwill Games to World Report, you name it. There were a lot of things he did which didn't have a profit motive at all. They were truly altruistic endeavors. So Ted running that as a mom and pop shop was one thing. The other side of it the science story is interesting. It goes along with all the features enterprises at CNN, the medical unit, the travel unit, the computer unit, and of course, the science unit. All of these were stood up with direct linkages to sponsorships. So AT&T went to Ted when he was having a hard time meeting payroll at CNN and said, Ted, we'd like to sponsor science programming on this new network of yours. This is, right at the beginning. And Ted, in his altruistic way, probably would have said yes anyway. But the big check that AT&T back in the Ma Bell days was willing to write for that is what motivated that whole endeavor. And so if you recall, in the early days on CNN, the features program, Science Among Them, aired 3 times a week, and they all had weekend shows, half-hour shows. And every time a science piece aired, there was an immediate adjacency commercial for AT&T. Reach out and touch someone, right? And so those spots over the course of a week were absolutely untouchable. Those science stories had revenue attached directly to them. Now, over time, CNN got more successful and they dropped those direct linkage ads to pieces because they didn't need to do it anymore, right? They were successful enough to do it. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the beginning of the end of the science unit, because over time, instead of being connected to revenue and, if we get rid of this team, what are we going to do about the 3 million we lose from AT&T? All of a sudden we lost our mooring financially. And it was just a matter of time before somebody, and it happened to be John Klein, would look at those numbers and say, wait a minute, why do we have 7 people covering science? We don't even like science. And we were having a hard time getting on the air because we didn't have the mandate anymore. So it's a complex story. It begins with Ted and in his vision and his altruism, but frankly, there was money to be made in putting science on the air for many years at CNN, and that's what stood it in good stead for quite some time.
Let's talk a little bit about trust in the media, or growing lack of trust, which is a huge issue. So if trust in science journalism continues to erode, and in science, if you will, and institutions like CNN and PBS weaken, what fills the vacuum, and what does that mean for our ability to respond to real world threats like climate change?
Yeah, it's a big concern, clearly. What I see, though, are a lot of little shoots of green coming up through the embers of this tectonic volcanic shift, if you don't mind me mixing metaphors there. But there's a lot of good content out there, smart people, many of them who come from the science world, not like me. I'm the history major who learned science. It's the other way around for most of them, developing big audiences on TikTok and YouTube and so forth, telling science in a way that is very engaging to big audiences. And I always make the analogy is like CNN was like a department store. You had the weather department, the sports department, the science department, the news department, and it was all packaged up, and that suited everybody well in the world of cable. Now it's a lot of boutiques. So people have to seek out these trusted sources and figure out who's bullshitting them and who isn't. And so it puts a lot more onus on the listener and viewer. In other words, if you think about it, when I grew up with, Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley, there were just a couple of white guys in New York deciding what I should hear and what was accurate and what that's the way it is, all that stuff. Now the individual is kind of responsible for producing their own daily feed of news. And so we've asked people to do a lot more work to suss this all out and to find the good gouge, as it were. And yet at the same time, I don't think we've really taught people how to be media literate. I think we have a nation that could use some civics lessons anyway. And so we're kind of adrift with people stumbling into people who are smart and trusted, but don't really have a strategy for consuming good information in this environment. So it's a tricky time, but I think over time, it might be okay. I think the transition is ugly.
Well, I just want to pick up on that and then we'll shift. But you mentioned the splintering of the audiences, and I know that most of us who consume news see that in the realm of politics, certainly, but in science, it seems particularly dangerous, right? Because good people could differ about an opinion, about a policy, but science, we all grew up thinking there was truth and facts. And I guess do you find yourself, as you're doing your reporting now, concerned about this splintering and the possibility of people telling stories about whether it's climate or vaccines that just aren't scientifically sound? And what does that do for you? And what's the burden added for people like you?
Well, science is about facts. And we are in a post fact world here, right? People are ignoring facts. They are choosing their own facts. And I don't know how to stop that trend. That's a big trend that comes from this whole rise of the MAGA movement and this idea that we're not going to embrace a common set of not beliefs, just facts. Forget the beliefs. We can disagree on beliefs, but facts we shouldn't disagree on. And so it's very difficult to stem all of that. It kind of I think it begins with big interests like oil and tobacco polluting the scientific environment, whether it's climate change or smoking, with junk science and confusing people about what science is. And I remember one of the first films I did at CNN on climate. It was just a basic climate change hour for the CNN Presents. And I remember fighting tooth and nail with the editorial leadership there about this on the one hand, on the other hand type journalism that we were doing at the time. We were, giving equal time to the IPCC, which is 98% of the world's scientists who've gone through the rigors of peer review, saying one thing, and some hack from the Cato Institute funded by Exxon saying the other thing. And when you cover politics, that's how you do it, right? You get the Democrat, get the Republican. At the end of it, you say, well, we must have some semblance of middle ground truth here. Well, it doesn't work that way in science. And so I fought hard to get that nonsense out of it. I didn't succeed completely. I would say I probably got it to 75-25. But over time, I think that has changed. I think people are accepting generally, if you look at the numbers, most people accept the fact that the climate is changing. They're confused about what's causing it. And that's the spot where I try to do my stories. I think about that audience. I'm not going to get the deniers. I don't have to preach to the choir. It's the people who are, something's up. There's a lot of wildfires, there's a lot more rain, whatever it is. These are facts. And if we can just feed those people with information, maybe we can chip away at this erosion.
Miles, you once told me about a conversation you had, I think, with a neighbor in Florida, which to me revealed a lot about how distrust of the media and science has become far more prevalent. Tell us that story.
No, this is in Vero Beach, Florida, as ruby red as you can get. There's a condo I owned there for years that my parents lived in. Anyway, I was there and the lawn guy came by and he kicked up a stone and it broke my big sliding glass window. It was like a $2,000 replacement. And so I called the guy up and I said, do you carry insurance for this kind of thing? I'll pay your deductible. It's an understandable mistake. And he said, you're that guy on CNN, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And I thought he was going to, say, I really like you. And I watch you all the time. He said, I'm not doing anything for you, pal. I feel sorry for you. And he hung up. And I was like, wow, the lawn guy feels sorry for me. We're in a bad state.
Yeah, things have really changed.
There was a time when I started at CNN, it was universally regarded as middle ground objective the world over. And it's a shame that has been lost along the way. A lot of things changed over the years, for sure.
CNN and PBS sit on opposite sides, maybe, of the media spectrum, commercial to public, certainly.
Yeah.
Yet both face trust erosion and audience decline. What structural forces are now hitting both of them at the same time?
Well, we've just seen the fundamental assault on the media by certain quarters, which have led people to question everything that legacy large media say. And, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. When you look at the content PBS or CNN does over the years, you would probably say it's left of center. I would suggest that that's probably true. Does that mean that it's raging liberalism, or was, I should say? Speaking for PBS and PBS News, I would say we're as down the middle as anything is anymore. But we've been characterized successfully by the Fox Newses of the world as being dishonest in a liberal way. And they have done a good job, getting out ahead of that. And I think, frankly, those of us in our part of the media have been on our back foot on this for too long. But I do think we need to be honest about, the realities of it, and that we, work toward this. The fact that we might fall down on the left side of middle, we need to be honest and transparent about that and not deny it, put it that way.
Another big theme that we're looking to unpack in our podcast series is the way in which media is rewarded for speed and immediacy. And of course, CNN at its inception, that was its promise, right? And they were the first 24/7. We'll tell you what's happening up to the minute. And yet, in some ways, CNN and others have lost their grip on that. Why do you think that is? I mean, technology tells a lot of the story, but it does seem like there was a time not that long ago when people say, "Oh, breaking news, turn on CNN." I don't think my kids would ever say that
Yeah.
statement.
No, no, they're on this thing, of course, you know. CNN Kodak invented the digital camera and they got scared of it and put it up on a shelf and didn't want to tell anybody about it. CNN was their very early days with CNN.com, but didn't know how to turn that into a business because it was too beholden to the cable industry. Those subscription fees really cornered CNN as it, I don't think anybody looked at the trends and didn't see it. The question was, how do you make the elephant dance and make that jump and be true to your quarterly earnings reports and walk away from that lucrative cable subscription arrangement? And that they were trapped, just like Kodak was trapped with paper and fixer. And as a result, the world changed. And like so many good, innovative business ideas, they were trapped inside their own business model. There's no reason that CNN couldn't have led the way into the phones that we have. And, you know, it was easier for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to make the transition because they weren't beholden to, you know, hundreds of cable enterprises that were sending them lots of money. It's a classic case. It's, you know, it's something you'd read about in Harvard Business School case study of a business that was very innovative and owned a sector, but when new innovations came along, could not respond, actually was unable to because of the structure of its business.
Do you think CNN bears some responsibility for the fractured media moment we're living in now? Not by intent, but by consequence?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's would someone have come along and done 24-hour news and news as it happens, and eventually that would have happened. But Ted did it. Ted and Reese and all the people who were there at the very beginning who actually had the real vision for this. The idea of watching the world unfold as it happens was a CNN innovation, but it was like any good technology, someone would have done it eventually, right? So do you blame Ted? Do you blame the founders of that? Or do you blame the fact that this is just an inevitable outgrowth of what technology would do? You know, someone was going to build the atomic bomb. It was just a question of who got to it, right? And so we've had this natural progression of technology, which has really, you know, you could say it was not stoppable. What could have been different? I suppose the one thing that could have been different is CNN could have stuck a little more to its journalistic guns. But, you know, it was there they were trapped in that business model where they were trying to, you know, flatten out the peaks and valleys of its viewing habits because people treated CNN sort of as a news utility before we had the phones. They'd tune in when something big happened and then they'd walk away. And CNN spent years and years trying to flatten that all out and never really had great success with it. So maybe there's a lesson in there that, you know, if you're willing to accept that as a reasonably solid, honest business, maybe CNN should have stayed in that lane.
What worries you more, the explosion of content creators or the onset of AI and algorithms dominating people's news feeds? I mean, the two go hand in hand, but I'm just curious, what do you think is more of an existential threat as we go forward?
And the third thing is just AI content just being completely fictitious in all of this as well. You know, what the creators who present themselves as experts and who are not encumbered by any of the fact checking we all go through is very troublesome. It's interesting though, if you talk to some of the ones who've been more successful, as they get more successful, they start doing a lot of fact checking because they want, you know, many of them want to be right. And so there a certain natural desire to get the story right, even among, well, at least people with good intentions. There are plenty of them out there without good intentions. Put it that way. How you sort through that is unfortunately up to the viewer. So AI is, you know, just throws gasoline on this, right? And you know, we're at a point now where, you know, I've seen you know, Hani Farid at Berkeley, who's an expert on this. I was doing a Zoom with him the other day, and he plastered Sam Altman's face on him live, and he sounded like him in the Zoom, in live, in real time. So we are at the point where it is indistinguishable, AI is, from otherwise bona fide content. The only thing that I'm hopeful for is that everybody knows what's going on. And at least maybe there's a certain degree of skepticism here before people buy in. I guess I'm being naive when I say that, because people, if it's something that appeals to them and matches their worldview and their echo chamber, they're probably going to share it almost immediately. And how we stop that, I don't know. It's scary.
How might trust be restored in journalism? What is the path forward? And if trust isn't restored, what are the consequences?
Well, we are all journalists. We've spent all our life in this profession, so it does sound self-serving, but we can't have a functioning democracy if there aren't honest journalists trying to sort through the facts and present a reasonable facsimile of what's going on in the world. And if we lose that, and I fear that's right where we are right now, we lose our democracy. But look what's happening. We are losing our democracy even as we speak. And this is part of the story, right? So how we do this, how we get our credibility back, I think journalists should be less partisan if they can. There's a room and place for analysis and opinion, but I feel like I'm kind of old fashioned. A lot of that has crept into the direct coverage. And because, journalists feel that the actual who, what, when, where, and why the story is commoditized. And so why should I bother with that? I need to put a spin on it in order to get some clicks. Well, this has a very corrosive effect, because at that point, everybody's, doing a spin on some set of facts, but who actually went out and got the facts? Who are the people that are still going to the city hall meetings, the city council meetings, getting on a research vessel to go to Antarctica to watch scientists do their work? There are lots of people who sit at home and will take what I do here and, call themselves content creators and put a little spin on it, and off they go. It's hard work, it's expensive, and there isn't really a solid business model that has emerged yet to support it. This endeavor of mine is a labor of love as much as anything. I'm not in this to make a lot of money. I'm in it because I truly believe this is a story that needs to be told. But journalism can't survive until we find a way to support these kinds of endeavors. And unfortunately, people don't really appreciate the hard work that goes into it.
I have one more question for you, Miles, and that is, I've known you long enough to know you've had a couple of dreams in your life as a reporter and as a human being. And I think where you're at right now represents one of them. The other is space. Tell us about that. What does this mean for you, this trip? And what would have going into space have meant for you?
Well, those are my two big things. When I was a science correspondent at CNN, I wanted to go to Antarctica and to space. And my endeavors to go to Antarctica were thwarted by scheduling and budgetary reasons, no kind of banal reasons. The space endeavor, I worked on that for several years and actually had an agreement with NASA and at the time, Time Warner, to CNN to do a flight on the space shuttle to the International Space Station. And it took years to get this all put together. And we were going to announce it a week or so after Columbia should have landed in February of 2003. And of course, that changed everything for the shuttle program. And as a footnote, my endeavor to go to space under the aegis of NASA and CNN. So that did not happen. Come here. I've grown up a little bit since then. I think space is interesting. There's no question about it. And I think it would have been a great story to tell it at that time, to understand how the shuttle operates and how the space station operates and what it's like to be on a crew and all those things. But this story has way more meaning and consequence to every person on the planet. I'm at a glacier that literally threatens every coastal community on this planet. And these scientists are here trying to understand it. You can't fix a problem until you understand it. And to be a part of that is really much more meaningful journalistically to me. When I woke up in the morning, we arrived at the Thwaites Glacier, and I went out on the deck. I was moved to tears, and it was a couple of things. I was just struck by the beauty of this glacier facing me. It was just kind of stunning, and breathing this fresh air here. And then at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we are doing our damnedest to ruin this. And so, they call the glacier the Doomsday Glacier. The glacier isn't doing anything wrong. We're the ones that are inviting doomsday upon ourselves on so many fronts. And so to be here and tell that story, frankly, means a lot more to me and probably to many more people in my audience than Miles get to joyride in space.
Wonderful. Well, Miles, thank you for joining us from the far edge of the world. Your coverage has been eye-opening, inspiring, essential, and we really appreciate all the work you do as an independent science journalist. By the way, you do a lot of this on your own, as you mentioned. It takes a lot of work to find the money to support your work, among other things. So we appreciate everything done. Everyone, you can follow Miles O'Brien's reporting and his video reporting, as well as his commentary on his Substack. There's a link for you we'll provide. And thanks to all of you for watching Breaking the News Deep Cuts. Thank you, Bill, for joining. And if this discussion resonated, we hope you'll share it with anyone who cares about the future of journalism, science, and public trust. We're also inviting you to help us bring our documentary podcast series to life, Breaking the News, CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media. This is an independent project built on deep reporting, archival research, and conversations like this one, so your support will make that possible. You'll find a link to donate and learn more below. In the weeks ahead, we'll be releasing more deep cut conversations. We hope you'll continue to join us on those and look for them on our Substack. Until next time, thanks for joining us, Miles. Thanks, Bill. And thanks, everybody, for watching.